than 100 flights have landed in Canada with at least one positive COVID-19 case on board. When are Canadians going to get a serious plan to secure the border?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every step of the way, this government has added measures to protect Canadians from the importation of COVID-19. In fact, infections resulting from international travel represent just over 1% of total infections in this country. And, Mr. Speaker, those infections are caught because we have a rigorous process. Travelers must submit to a pre-departure test, a post-arrival test, a stay in a government quarantine facility, a further quarantine up to 14 days, and a test on day 10. Mr. Speaker, we'll stop at nothing. We constantly review the data, and we will add more measures if necessary.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, they'll stop at nothing except closing the border to keep out dangerous variants. In fact, travel restrictions are an example of a plan that works. The Atlantic Canada bubble is an example of that. British Columbia and Quebec now have both registered cases of the double mutation variant from India. Is the Prime Minister going to immediately stop flights from COVID hotspot countries? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to first of all start by thanking and commending Atlantic Canada and the premiers of those provinces for taking bold action on COVID-19, including, Mr. Speaker, keeping measures in place until cases are so low as to be sure that they will not rebound, making sure that they have strong measures to isolate people, to protect people while they're isolating, to ensure those people are in fact staying home and not spreading COVID in communities. And Mr. Speaker, that's the work that we need to do together across this country. Mr. Speaker, I'll reiterate, we have some of the strongest measures in the world. We'll stop at nothing to protect Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Health Minister thanking the Atlantic Premiers for the leadership that her Prime Minister fails to take at the border. It's ironic, but it shouldn't be a surprise from this Health Minister who ignored travel restrictions on the first wave of the pandemic, and Canadians paid the price. Now we find out the most dangerous variants are coming in. We're not properly vaccinated because of her failures, and they're not taking restrictions now. Mr. Speaker, when will that minister stop failing Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think what Canadians want right now, more than anything else, is for their elected leaders to work together to protect their lives. And that's exactly what we've done, Mr. Speaker, every step of the way with provinces and territories, no matter where a Canadian lives. In regards to borders, Mr. Speaker, we have some of the strongest measures in the world. As I mentioned, travelers go through a rigorous process of testing and quarantine. We'll stop at nothing. We continue to monitor data, and we will add additional measures if necessary.
Safe Space Cafe. News, music, and comedy.
Our first 6-minute rounds, we will start with MP Poilievre. You have the floor.
Mr. Priddle, you employ people in my riding. How many people work for you at the wood source?
We have 70 full-time staff here.
You had an expansion that concluded about 4 years ago, a large warehouse in which you do milling and other work on lumber products. How much did you spend on government in order to get that built?
We spent about $600,000 in architects' fees, consultants' fees, development fees, planning application fees, building permit fees, and the building itself was just over $1 million.
Wow, so you spent $600,000 on government for $1 million building.
That is correct.
And that $1 million, does that include the 600,000?
No, so
so it added 60% to the cost.
Added 60% to the cost of the
You have two warehouses, though. There's the old warehouse that's about the same dimension. It's about 30 or 40 feet away. When that was originally built 50 years ago, how much time and money did the then owners have to spend on government?
Well, it was built in the early 1970s, and we are currently in the city of Ottawa. Back then it was Osgood Township, and it was the permit was applied for on a Monday, and on a Thursday they had the permit. It was a one-page document that had the site plan, the building, the engineer's drawing, the engineer's stamp, and away they went.
So wait a sec here. They applied on a Monday and they got the permit on a Thursday?
That is correct.
And how long did it take you for your new warehouse 30 feet away?
Well, it took just over
Ballpark.
3 years to get the permit to start construction from when we initiated the conversation.
So back in the 70s, it took 3 days, and now it takes 3 years.
That would be at maybe 4 days in the 70s to 3 years now.
Okay. And has that old building, has it collapsed on anyone?
No, it's actually a beautiful structure built with unique construction methods, nail laminated timber using great Canadian lumber, and it's doing its job beautifully today.
That it hasn't erupted in flames or exploded or killed anyone?
No, as we say here, knock on wood, it's still standing and doing well.
Good pun. I like that. So in other words, the regulators did their job back in the 70s in 4 days to allow for the safe construction of a big, beautiful building that created hundreds of jobs over the decades. They did that in 4 days. Now it takes 3 years to do the very same thing. You spent $600,000 on government to build this new facility. How many people could you have employed doing productive work for your company with that $600,000?
That's a tough question to answer. So it would bring the cost of production down, and we would be far more competitive. So we've over the years had to compete against offshore companies. Huge amount of competition with Asian companies that have very, very cheap electricity, cheap cost of labor, no health and safety issues,
But generally speaking, what roughly how many jobs does $600,000 represent? Roughly, you don't need to be
that would be another 7 or 8 full-time employees.
So 7 or 8. Now multiply this story, everyone, times thousands of businesses across the country that could be hiring and paying wages with this money, but instead are spending the money filling out paperwork for government to achieve precisely nothing above and beyond what was achieved 50 years ago with 3 or 4 days and a few $1,000s to get the same approval done. That is the gatekeeper economy. It drives down jobs and wages and drives up consumer prices because businesses, of course, have to pass on these costs to the consumer and to the worker. Now, Tim, the consultants say, don't worry about all this paperwork. We'll do it for you. You pay us a fee, and then we'll go and get you a grant from a bunch of government departments to compensate you for all of the costs government has imposed on you. So in other words, they block you from building and then they subsidize you to build. If you had two options, option one is the government gets out of your way, gives you a simple, a clear, and safe approval, and lets you build with your own money. Or option B, they delay you for 4 or 5 years and charge you $600,000, but then offer you a taxpayer-funded grant to compensate you for those costs. Which of those two options as an entrepreneur would you prefer?
I will always prefer the former, where we look after things and do our things ourselves. And I don't want any of the members of the committee to think that we're some fly-by-night operation. All our members are members of the International Brotherhood of Carpenters or Joiners. We look after our family here. We aren't trying to do anything to damage the economy, damage the environment. We want to grow and develop and turn Ottawa back into a lumber town, moving it away from the political town it's become. Take us back in history a bit.
Absolutely. It was a lumber town. That's how the city was founded. And you run a great business that's been there for generations and paid good wages and provided good services. Now, if the government could get out of your way, you could do even more. Thanks for being here, Tim.
The member for Abbotsford.
We're in the middle of the worst health crisis of our lifetime. A massive third wave, lockdowns across the country, Canadians desperate to get their shots. Yet the Prime Minister's budget has no plan to speed up vaccinations, no support for overwhelmed hospitals, for Canadians who are sick and dying of COVID. What his budget does have is $100 billion for his re-election, but nothing to fight this pandemic. Why did the Prime Minister put his political interests ahead of the health of Canadians? Does he not realize that this pandemic is now his failure?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we knew that the third wave was coming, and that's why in March we said we would be sending the provinces $4 billion to support them in their fight against the third wave of the virus. In March, we knew how important it was to accelerate the vaccination campaign, and that's why we said the provinces would get $1 billion to do that. And in this budget, Mr. Speaker, we committed to extending business and income supports through to the end of September to help Canadians as we fight the third wave.
The Honourable Member for Abbotsford.
She knew the third wave was coming, yet the Prime Minister's budget failed to deliver any money to vaccinate Canadians more quickly or to address skyrocketing health costs across the country. No support for provinces and healthcare workers who are overwhelmed. Instead, he told them he'll get around to it after the pandemic is over. As Canadians are suffering and dying, he found billions for his re-election, but not one nickel to provide Canadians with the health care they need. Does this Prime Minister not realize that this pandemic is now his failure?
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the member opposite missed our announcement at the end of March, but we could see, epidemiologists could see the third wave was coming, and we knew provinces and territories needed support right away. That's why we announced then $4 billion to support the healthcare system, $1 billion to support vaccination campaigns. And in this budget, Mr. Speaker, we committed more than $12 billion in additional support to maintain our business and income support programs for Canadians through the end of September.
The Honourable Member for Abbotsford.
Well, there's no way of sugarcoating this. This budget also failed to deliver an economic growth plan. No plan to reopen the economy, create jobs, or a more competitive business environment. Here's what Robert Asselin, one of the Prime Minister's top policy advisors, had to say, quote, "The budget doubles down on programs that have yielded few results to date. It's hard to find a coherent growth plan," end quote. It's hard to find a coherent growth plan? Coming from one of his Liberal advisors? Why has the Prime Minister failed Canadians so badly?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, this is a budget targeted squarely at delivering jobs and increasing Canada's economic growth. This budget will create 500,000 work experience and job training opportunities. This budget will deliver on our throne speech commitment to create 1 million jobs by the end of this year. This budget is a budget that will help Canada come
Don't forget to like, dislike, subscribe, and comment. Safe Space Cafe. And always, have a good day.